Welcome to My Forever Home, the podcast. I'm Frances Cosway and I've helped hundreds of people create forever homes. I can't wait to share the journey with you. So let's start. Welcome everyone to this episode of My Forever Home, the podcast, as part of the Sustainable Living and Homes series. Now, today I'm going big. I'm going large, and I want to bring to the fore the biggest picture of sustainability, the bigger picture of sustainability in Australia and what the impact will be for consumers. I had Richard Earp from Earp Bros in the studio a few weeks back, and we were discussing NDCs, more on that in a minute, amongst a whole lot of other things, and the impact of NDCs on end consumers. And I found what Richard had to say fascinating, and I wanted to share his knowledge with you today because his passion for sustainability is so evident every time we speak, and you'll hear that for yourself today. So I'm thrilled to have him back so that we can really get into the much bigger picture of sustainability rather than the specifications and how you can make more sustainable choices for your home. So it's a much bigger outlook today. So a little bit about Richard, who is the Managing Director of Earp Bros, which is a family-owned tile business in Australia. And we've been working together for many, many years now, probably over 12 years. He started working in Earp, though, in his school holidays from the age of 13, and working in sampling, packing, merchandising and sales to be part of his whole life, and tiles are in his blood. And I've had Richard on the podcast previously talking about porcelain tiles and of all things grout. So his knowledge is far-reaching. Richard has visited manufacturing plants all over the world, and during his visit in China in 1998, one of the first Australians in the industry to do so, he realised the vast differences in manufacturing there were in different countries and even within each country. And it was at that point that Earp Bros decided to focus on quality and environmental responsible manufacturers. Aligning with the leading producers globally, Earp were the first tile company to join the Green Building Council and the first to certify tiles with David Bagg's Global Green Tag certification system. Now, David was on the podcast, one of the very first episodes. So that's all about Green Tag accreditation. So you can go back and listen to that if you wanted to hear more about that. And also then further with Richard, the Declare label from the Living Building Challenge many years ago. There is no ceramic university, and the practical experience gained from being part of such a great family enterprise as Earp Bros, which was established in 1883, has enabled Richard to add value to an industry, particularly in the education of design professionals. And I can vouch for that personally with Richard myself. With his passion for ceramic products, he's been heavily involved in not just material design and supply, but active in the development of better testing and certification systems for ceramic tiles to improve the built and natural environments far into the future. And you'll hear that today. So welcome back to the podcast, Richard. It's an absolute delight to have you here today.
Oh, Frances, it's so good to be back. It's we've been working together for a long time, and I really, really enjoy your company, and I really love sharing knowledge and sharing the passion of the built environment.
Awesome. And look, your passion is, I can't wait for listeners to hear that today for themselves, but it's just so lovely for me to have a supplier that is, it just oozes, your passion just oozes, and it's just so awesome to share that with you. So look, before we get into it, I just want to give a background to our listeners today and just quickly cover off what NDCs are. And they are, very well known as NDCs. So NDC stands for Nationally Determined Contribution, and they are at the heart of the Paris Agreement and the achievement of its long-term goals. So NDCs embody efforts by each country to reduce national emissions and adapt to the impacts of climate change. Now, I'm going to try and not get political here because we could open another can of worms here. But explained in another way, they are like an international credit system that will make each country more accountable for their consumption rather than what they create locally, as is the situation now. And it forms the basis of how international governments can communicate international targets. Now, each country prepares their NDC and submits it every 5 years as part of the Paris Agreement. And it must be more ambitious than the submission that they had in the previous 5 years. The next round for submissions is 2025. Now, Australia submitted its NDC in 2015. and we submitted an updated version of the NDC in 2022. And that's where I can't get political. And this updates Australia's commitment to reducing its emissions to 43% below 2005 levels by 2030. And that was a massive election pledge. We're currently at 22% reduction since 2025. So we've got till 2030 to get to 43. So, Richard, your take on how NDCs will impact Australia and Australian consumers is far-reaching. And that's what we were talking about quite a lot when you came to the studio. So I wanted to start there. And I know we're going to be on shaky ground, but I'll try not to get political because I'm a political beast. But we're not exactly world leading in our ambitions when it comes to our NDC pledge. But the 2022 update is definitely improvement on what it was. So how do you feel the current NDC's pledge will impact Australia and its consumers? And that pledge is to get to 43% below 2005 levels by 2030.
Yeah, it's a frightening undertaking that the globe has to achieve in such a short period of time. And like you say, politics aside, planet Earth we're all part of it. And I think that there's a very famous person in a futurist years gone by who always stated, planet Earth, it never came with an instruction manual. And globally, we've sort of siloed, countries have siloed and gone about business in their own way. And we've now got to a point where we're voting governments in and out on climate policies. And they're very, very significant policy undertakings that they have to undertake to combine all efforts globally to come up with the Paris Agreement outcomes. And, what is it that they're going to be able to deliver that lower our carbon emissions and enable us as a trading platform, Australia, to actually get down to achievable levels in such a short period of time. Let's put some scope around it. You said we've got, we're 23% of our way towards, our 2025 targets, and 2025 is going to come around very quickly. And we're talking about billions and billions of government expenditure to become a lower carbon emitting nation. Now, we do very little manufacturing in Australia today. We import vast majority of our materials. And those materials that we import from different countries, they're manufacturing those goods on our behalf. We exchange funds for materials, and those materials come into Australia, and we love buying these materials because they're cheap. Unfortunately, these countries that manufacture those goods will have a carbon footprint that is way larger than they actually need to produce for their own requirements. So those carbon offsets will be transferred to Australia in a form in future years. Therefore, as a government, if they can't afford the current levels of expenditure that they're spending to bring us to a low carbon emitting country, then they're going to have to find ways and call it what you like and what you think it may be, but it'll be a form of tax where materials that come into the country will be internationally recognised under what they call the ITMOs, which are the internationally transferred mitigation outcomes, meaning that everything will have a carbon point score, and things that come into the country most likely for the governments to reach their targets will have to be some sort of form of tax on them. I mean, it's just obvious that government just doesn't have the money to do what we have to do. Globally, we need $6 trillion a year to become a low carbon economy globally. We can't even muster up $100 million a year at this point in time globally. Sorry, $100 billion. So the scope of work's in front of all the governments. I mean, the beautiful thing is they've got a communication tool through the Paris Agreement. They've got, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change is actually a forum where everyone can get together and nut out how they're going to do this. And it gives them some confidence that everyone's heading in the right direction together. And that sort of, that's really encouraging that we've got to a point where everyone's talking in the one room, but to actually raise the funds that they require is going to have to come from the marketplace, the consumers of the goods. Your home, you're consuming energy, there's going to come in a form of tax through cleaner energy. It's going to come through consumables when we actually buy our groceries. It's going to come through the materials that we buy that, you know, are in the house, washing machines, microwaves, whatever it is. If they've got a carbon, you know, if there's a carbon requirement to manufacture those goods, the governments are going to have to pass on some form of tax that enables them to move and transition to a new economy.
So if I understand correctly, and I suppose this is a follow-up from when you were in the studio and we were talking about this as well, just to put it into really simple terms too, it means that if you're buying, consumers are buying products that are made overseas, being imported into Australia, that have not been made in an environmentally sustainable way, that ultimately the end consumer will pay for that because they haven't used energy efficient and sustainable principles to produce those goods.
Let's look at tiles.
Let's look at tiles. Yeah, it's an easy one. It's one you know well.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of gas required. And believe it or not, there are still countries that are using coal to actually fire or create energy that actually is used in the kilns. It's just Foshan region 20 or 15, 20 years ago, you couldn't look 100 metres down the road and see anything because of the amount of pollution. I mean, it was that bad. It was well known that the Olympics came and Beijing had to clean years to try and get to a point where they could actually see the sky. That's how bad pollution was. And tiles are a very large emitter. So moving to cleaner forms of energy, gas, it's still a huge amount of carbon required to manufacture a metre of tiles. Now, they may have cleaned up their act or moved industry from one part of the country to another. But if we're bringing those tiles into the country and they're a massive carbon footprint, my guess is that someone's going to have to start holding companies to account who are actually using the wrong forms or the larger energy requirement. When we talk about Porcelanosa, they've actually engaged back in 2000 huge amounts of investment dollars to reduce the amount of gas required to make that same square metre of tile. More so, what they did was they took the initiative and used what they called cogeneration power that removed the heat from the kiln firing process and turned it into an energy form that actually creates 30% of the energy requirement of the factory. So it was a initiative. That initiative is now in 60 to 70 plants. That technology has been shared to 60 or 70 plants around the world, and they are now using a significant less amount of energy because they're using the energy from the kiln into other forms. But now they're investing in other technologies that will reduce the energy consumption by 60% in that same square metre of tiles. Now, that investment comes with a lot of upfront capital cost. And therefore, those tiles, is aligned with a similar quality material in the marketplace, are the same price. But the investment in the future means that they won't have to buy 60% more energy. So they, as a factory, will gain the benefit over time.
Yeah.
They believe that that investment in their future-proofing their business was viable. And as it turns out, as we see in Europe with the Ukraine-Russian conflict, gas prices have gone through the roof.
Yeah.
Now, they've future-proofed their business. But when it comes to the future, when I compare a metre of tiles from a company like Porcelanosa versus a metre of tiles that come from China, the embodied energy will be a significantly different story. So those who invested in the future of planet Earth by investing in the future of their businesses have already done the infrastructural work. But when we start looking at a government, they're going to start saying, well, you know, a metre of tiles from that manufacturer will have a lesser import tax charge for these environmental certification changes than the Chinese.
Which means that if, you know, based on what you were saying before, that what is now a cheap tile will not become a cheap tile because the consumer will have to pay for the fact that that was not produced in an environmentally friendly way. So they're going to end up paying more for those tiles. and the quality may not be there anyway. So I love that you use the word future-proof for these businesses, because that's the term that I use that people are using for their houses. Future-proof your house. And it's about the energy as well. If you invest now, it's like the solar panels, passive house, all of those things. Energy is only going to get more expensive. We've seen it already. And so you are future-proofing your house, not just in the design, but the energy it's going to be using. And there's an investment up front for that. But the payoff is long-term. So, which is what you're talking about as well. So have you got some insight with, I mean, what you're talking about? I do read the press a lot, but I don't hear it. I don't hear them talking about this. Is this something that are you on some body that I don't know about, or are you just predicting and being like this futurist that you were talking about before and saying there is really no other choice? The politicians don't want to talk about it right now because people don't want to face having to pay more things, particularly in the current economic environment. Or how are you getting this insight, Richard? Share with me.
Yeah.
You're on some board somewhere.
Yeah, no, look, being part of
a futurist.
Yeah, look, there is a bit of future thinking. I mean, you just have to look at logic. I mean,
yeah.
You know, we look at what
total sense.
We look at
I just wanted to know whether you had some inkling that, you know, you got some hotline somewhere that's saying this is what's going to happen. But what you're saying is complete sense. So you're just using your smarts to say it can't be any other way.
Gilbert and Tobin did a briefing report in relation to Article 6 rules in that global framework. It's written quite clearly that the government needs to start drawing up concise information that is auditable, meaning that the government has to turn up to these conferences. 45,000 people turn up to these conferences. Yeah, it's not a small show. And the 45,000 people that turn up, they actually have to have frameworks that are auditable and accountable for where the Australian government is actually going to reduce their targets. I mean, Australia is actually an international hotspot for tree degradation and land clearance. It's actually one of the world's worst, believe it or not. And not the Amazon or any of these other countries, it's actually Australia. So when we actually consider that they're going to go back and they're going to start talking about how they're going to achieve this, the government's actually got to come up with funding to do it. But you can't just make this stuff up. Yeah. We know that one thing that always happens is taxes go up. And as we transition from one to another, and they need to spend the funds, they need to find ways to actually reduce, and they need to find ways to invest. And there's lots of ways they'll do it that we do know through that, Gilbert, and it's easy to find. I can give you a link if you like, but if you want to read through
put it in the show notes for sure. I think it'll be great.
Yeah. It's a boring as hell document. I think it's 41 pages long, but it starts to show without proven government policy. I mean, we know that the government is currently devising ways to soften the pain for individuals in ways that will enable them to build the income they need to actually continue to go down this road. I mean, you asked, future thinking is what we have to be. We're a 140-year-old family business, and we need to start to understand what effects our business will have in the immediate future when it comes to this global change. And it's not just addressing solar panels on the roof. It's not just reducing, our consumption internally. It's understanding the bigger picture and how we will measure our built environment and how we, as part of that cog, will be involved. And we know it's coming. It's going to happen. So imported goods, how will we be affected? And we'll look at different manufacturing processes. All our manufacturers, we have very few. We partner with only a couple, and we partner with them because they're long-term, future-thinking organisations that have already invested in this space. And that's who we love being around, because we know they're going to be around.
And look, interestingly, a lot of these forward-thinking businesses are based in Europe. And they've been, on the forefront of this movement for such a long time. I used to live in Europe many, many, many years ago, and, you just took your glass bottles. I mean, these are small things, obviously. It's the big businesses that need to make the big changes. But just even on a consumer level, that no one thought anything of packing your bike with all your recycled bottles and just taking them down to the end of the street to put in a big, it was like a big dump master. No one would do that in Australia. It was just so ingrained in their thinking 25, 30 years ago. And it just blew me away when I came back here at just how we really didn't do anything. And I am talking about a consumer level, but the movement has to start somewhere. But it is the businesses that are the big emitters. But I just find that it's the European producers that are making such big headway to, in your term, future-proof their business, because they know that there is going to be no business if this is not dealt with.
They don't have any choice, Francis. I mean, you go to Spain, they don't have gas. They don't have, they've got no energy forms. They've got no mining for coal or any of these sorts of things.
Yeah.
Actually,
we've been spoilt for too long.
Yeah, I mean, they're a net importer of energy, so they treat it with a great degree of respect. I mean, every room you go into in most of these plants and factories, they only lights turn on when there's movement. Otherwise, they're off. Everything's automatically turned off. I mean, it's just part of their function. They don't have energy to burn.
Yeah. So with this, and I mean, we're talking specifically about tiles, and we're talking about all sorts of products, but changes that are coming in that feel that are going to come in that are going to particularly affect consumers that are renovating or building. There's tiles. I mean, it's going to be all imported products. Or do you think that they will start with particular products, or do you think it's going to be just that? Do you think it'll start with particular products, or is it going to be just a blanket on all imported products? What do you?
You've heard the front page of the papers of the government talking about, taxing the big emitters.
Yeah.
Well, that's okay. You can tax the big emitters, and that's fine. But I mean, ultimately, that comes back to the consumer, you and me. That's a tax. So if that's their policy, then they're actually making us very, very uncompetitive, because all the things that are coming into the country aren't getting taxed in the same way. So therefore, there is an absolute need to balance that. And those imported goods will obviously have to get some sort of tax to make us competitive locally, because the big emitters, they're supplying Australia with, various goods. And, if we're talking big emitters, as in people like BHP or Rio who are exporting, or if we're talking about gas producers, if we're talking about the Dell Power Station, whomever it is they're talking about taxing, it comes back to us as the consumer. And the consumer is going to sit there and go, well, God, bloody hell, everything's really expensive here. It's like, why don't we just import more? Well, if we're taking some carbon from someone else and bring it to Australia, I mean, of course,
it's short-term thinking. It's short-term thinking. But the government needs the taxes so that they can get the money to then reinvest into renewable energy. So, like you were saying, they have to get the money from somewhere, and that's the only way they're going to be able to do it. And so it just means that things are going to get a lot more expensive. So when I'm talking to clients, and I've got many clients that are feeling, I'm going to put my build project on hold. I mean, this is not going to come in overnight, obviously, but I'm going to put it on hold. Things are going to come down in price. It's because of the war in Ukraine, and it's because, we're going through high inflation. It's like, I wouldn't be holding out, but all of these things are going to come into play. They're not going to happen overnight, but things are not going to get cheaper over time.
Yeah, look, it's a fascinating space, this one. It's probably going to be understanding that the built environment consumes 40 to 50% of our energy requirements in construction, and it's 50% of material use globally. I mean, this is a big space. So our homes, as we talk about, or our work environments, are where construction is, and the hospitals and what have you. But I mean, when we start looking at what's going to happen, we're going to have to start getting rid of the disposable society, the $2 shop, or the disposable barbecue you go down to Bunnings and buy for $100, and it's burned out, and after 6 months,
I call it the fast fashion interiors, actually, that you're even making it. It's not fast fashion, just what we wear. It's fast fashion interiors. It's cheap. I can stick it out on the nature strip in 12 months when don't like it anymore. And there's got no monetary value. Therefore, it's disposable. People don't care about the energy used to produce it and all that sort of stuff. I talk to people about that all the time.
And the big builder puts 45 apartments up and sells them and goes, let's just put the cheapest stuff in there we can, because they're just going to rip it out and replace it anyway. It's like that process is going to get targeted, and it's going to get targeted for a very good reason. If you look at the certifications we're going through, we start getting into this circular economy, and we start talking about what the circular economy is. And in brief, let's look at what this means. I mean, our linear thinking is where we look at, okay, we've got to move and transition to this low carbon economy. We need solar panels, man. Let's get some solar panels. And that's great, yeah, good. And then we get the electricity from the solar panels, and then we put some wind turbines up, and we drive some energy from the wind turbines, and we get to plug the electric car in, and everything's sweet. But we still haven't actually looked at the fact that we're going to have to replace and what happens in 10 years' time from putting the solar panel on. We've just gone down the same linear thinking where we haven't actually connected the end of that road to the start of the road.
But what about the lithium that has to be mined to make those panels?
What happens to the batteries, blah, blah, blah. So, I mean, we've actually got to start thinking circular, where we start, we actually have to think about coming right back to the start. It needs to be linked. And we start going through certifications, and we start thinking about this, and then we start calculating life cycle assessment. How long are these materials going to last? How do we hold people to account for how long those things are going to last? And we start calculating our built environment very differently. So when you talk about homes and things are going to get very expensive, we're actually going to find that the price of things in many ways will actually start to come down, because we'll start to calculate the real cost of things differently. And like you say, that fashion home that's like brings it in and takes it out, it's going to be a very unattractive space to operate in.
So let's I wanted to talk a little bit about the thinking with Earp Brothers. So you're the exclusive distributor of porcelanosa products in Australia, and we've been specifying these products for years, as you know, because of their quality, but also because of their green credentials and being green tag accredited. But you mentioned to me that less than 5% of the product that you import is due to its green rating. Why? I found that statistic fascinating, that you knew it, that people, you're importing the product, but people are only choosing it. About 5% of the people are choosing it because of the green rating. Yet that was one of the main reasons we went to you for porcelanosa, because of the green tag. So why do you think this is the case?
I mean, it's fascinating. We go to the election platforms and look at how people are storming up and down the footpath, driving these political agendas, and we vote governments in and we vote governments out, and we go down and buy some tiles. Last thing we want to do is buy a tile. It's got it's got a green tag. Oh, what's that? I don't even know what you're talking about. We've been involved with the Green Building Council since 2003, and there's progress being made in this space, and there's a movement that is really like the currently started to move to green certified materials. The understanding of the general consumer walking through this showroom and looking for green certified tiles is almost negligible. In fact, we have actually seen government buildings remove green certified materials and put non-green certified materials in. We've seen large organisations that sit on the stock exchange and talk about being carbon neutral, and as long as it's $20. It's like, what?
Yeah.
You're driving towards this sustainability platform. You advertise. You stand on this big, soapbox, and you pronounce, we're a multinational corporation and we're fantastic, and everything we do is all about carbon neutral and drive forward. But they actually take green certified tiles out of the equation. So it's just amazing how people don't act in the same way they pronounce they promote themselves as. It's very disappointing. So yeah, I reckon it would be less than 5% of our consumers, and we're a company that imports ceramic tiles, and they're a high embodied carbon energy material, and we are at the forefront of making sure that we minimize this space, and we measure it, and we articulate what we do to a marketplace. We train architects with a CPD points, two formal CPD points on our presentation with sustainability. But people just don't understand it. The most environmentally credentialed architectural firm in this country, awarded, most environmentally awarded they didn't even understand the tiles. There was a good option in that space. They were using paint finishes in bathrooms, thinking that was a great outcome. So when I sat down with these people and started talking to them about what they were doing, they were quite surprised to think that tiles were a good option when they were green certified. And when we talk about where we're going with this reduction of gas of 60%, and having the actual cogeneration power within the facility. It makes it a platinum rated material. And it's going to take us 3 years to get there, but we're talking about the most sustainable product. Why is it sustainable? Life cycle, etc., etc. It's no volatile, no VOCs in it, no volatile organic compounds. There's no phthalates. There's none of this silica. There's none of the asbestos. There's none of those sealers and nanotechnologies. And this product you put down, you clean with water for 100 years, and it's going to be in there for 100 years, and it's going to perform to that level of requirement. So it's
I'm flabbergasted by what you've just said. And I'm glad you talked about the cleaning too, because then it is zero chemicals. And the other thing to add to what you're saying is the thermal mass that you can actually create by using tiles as the floor surface rather than using timber or, dare I say, vinyl, which I know is still going in houses. So you're also going to gain the thermal mass properties by putting tile down. And that is actually one of the main reasons we used a tile. But of course, what's the point of trying to get thermal mass and then not using a green tag accredited tile? So, but I just found that statistic you gave me absolutely mind blowing.
We went through certifications and we went down this road with Porcelana, and we're doing it with another factory for a fundamental reason is you don't be one of Australia's oldest, like we're on the top 20 oldest companies in Australia. And you don't get there by, just like tripping down the road like everyone else. You've actually got to do what 99% of the other people don't do to be the 1% that makes the difference. And we actually did it because it's embedded in our DNA. That's how we think. We just look at it and go, this is mad. We're degenerating Earth at such a rate. It's just unsustainable. Without getting carried away or getting into the framework of it all, I mean, we are using a material that makes up 94% of the Earth's core. Tile is the most available raw material matrix there is on the planet. Timber is starting to be recognised as a very rare commodity. We do have, forest stewardship programs and sustainable platforms, and we can start talking about carbon and carbon capture and all that sort of stuff. I'll talk about that in a moment. But we're talking about a product that comes from Earth, and at the end of life, it is just Earth. There is no end product that needs to be recycled. If you want to, we've got a program. We've got a product stewardship program, the only one in the tile sector. If there's very few of them in the world. So this is about that circular economy and actually driving change. We still have work to do with adhesives and grouts and these things. These wet materials that go into the built environment, they need to be addressed. But we are working with companies to actually make sure that we can provide a material that does have no VOCs in it and is a long-lasting material in the built environment.
So I know that Porcelana currently is Green Tag Gold accredited, and you mentioned to me the other day, and you actually just mentioned it then, that they're moving towards platinum, which is, creme de la creme, and that they're looking at doing that in the future. So what does this mean in the manufacturing of the tiles, moving from gold to platinum? You already said it's going to take about 3 years to do that, but gold is great. Platinum's just, off the scale. But what does that mean for the manufacturing process? What do you need to change to go from gold to platinum?
It's 1% here, 0.5% there, 0.5% change here and there. I mean, we are talking about a company that has already been audited by PwC, and they are in the top 30 most respected companies globally of any manufacturing industry. David Baggs, if you ring David and ask him about Porcelana, so he just sits there and shakes his head and says it's the most impressive thing he's seen in manufacturing of any industry.
It's unbelievable.
And we're talking about something that is already, like you said, gold is something spectacular to achieve. Right? So, and the level A LCA rate it achieves is also quite spectacular. But when we start moving to platinum level, we need to reduce our carbon footprint. We need to use 60% less energy. We need to move to hydrogen type technology, energies that are injected into the kiln process. And there's all sorts of things that they've already implemented, and they're already starting that manufacturing process. So there's one. The second one is we're actually going to materials minimalisation. So when we look at a pallet of tiles, how many meters are on that pallet of tiles versus how many meters are on that pallet of tiles in previous years. We reduce the thickness. We're talking about a material that doesn't have to be as thick. So we reduce the material thickness by 20%. They're 20% less raw materials. The raw materials aren't coming from Ukraine anymore. rather than shipping the materials across the ditch over to, Spain and having trucks moving back and forth. We're actually materially using materials that are actually closer to the factory. We're actually looking at the movement of materials in and out of the factory and saying we're not going 1,000 kilometers, 2,000 kilometers away to get the raw materials. We're getting them from 100 kilometers away, and we're buying the quarries to make sure that we make those quarries run as effectively as we can. The engine oil in the diesel machines that harvest the raw materials that go to the factory is recycled. That machinery they're buying has a life cycle assessment put on it. The end of life of that quarry is already managed, and they put a bond in place to ensure that end of life, that quarry is managed before it's got to end of life. So end of life is 20 years away, 30 years away. They've already put money down to make sure that it's restoring that quarry back to a good, healthy earth position. Everywhere they go, whatever they touch, all the way through to the ink they use on the cardboard, which is already minimalised. So they use less cardboard, which comes from wind power. They're using vegetable inks. We're not using inks. I mean, it's just the thinking behind this is phenomenal.
And it is, as you say, it's every tiny touch point that they're thinking about. I mean, they're already doing the big thinking, but then the measurement of that is just off the scale. And I know when, Green Tag use third party people to go and measure and assess, which is great to make it what it is, but just to measure all those things is a force within itself. The time involved to do it and the care involved just to think about all those little things. But I mean, it as you said, it's future thinking. If you want to be around, this is where you got to be.
Yeah, I mean, and for those consumers that it's all too hard to think, you can be rest assured that David Baggs' Green Tags program are ISO certified to international levels on global best practice. Now, that enables us to look at like for like to give the consumer the information that they need without going down these rabbit holes. But when we start looking down, what some industries are doing, it's diabolically bad. There's no integrity, and we need to audit that integrity like to the nth degree to get rid of it, because without integrity, there's no success. Integrity is what drives success. I mean, it's the level of which we go to audit factories for the consumer to understand this is not just global best practice. We've looked at issues that haven't arisen yet that could arise. Silicosis, asbestos, the next big one's going to be phthalates and direct carcinogenics that exist in our built environment through a lot of these vinyl type products. People are starting to realize they've been actually putting harmful chemicals in our living areas, and they're actually directly associated to carcinogenic cancers. It's mad. And we're going to start seeing
most consumers are not aware of it.
I have no idea.
It blows me away, and I frequently have conversations with consumers. Oh, what do you think about the hybrid? Don't touch it. Do not. Anyway, it's really disappointing that the information is not as easily accessible as I think it should be. That it's cheap and it's waterproof, and it's full of massively nasty things that you're going to have emitting in your house for years and years and years, and you got kids crawling all over it. It just blows my mind. And but once I tell people, they don't touch it, but they just don't know.
So you asked the question earlier, things are going to be getting more expensive. No, we start to look at it like a solar panel. We're actually looking at upfront charge for having something that'll go down our built environment. And in high design products, there's a value because they look amazing in 10 years, 15 years, 20 years.
Correct.
They perform in 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years to a level where you're still cleaning with water, and it's a great environment. They perform well. They don't crack, break, snap, chip. They last. They're actually pretty cheap. Right.
So you touched on this before. It's clear that you're passionate about the sustainability. Your knowledge is amazing. So why did Earp decide all those years ago, you did touch on it, to partner with Porcelanosa for your tile products? You're around in 1883. What made you want to partner with them for the Australian market?
My brother Michael and I, and my nephew now, Josh, and my daughter Alex, We just, it's like, I think there's some old sayings, analogies you can refer to, but integrity is the essence of everything successful. And that was a quote from Buckminster Fuller, who wrote a book many, many, many years ago called, Critical Path. And, he was a futurist of great belief. He's an architect that, he's been followed, and he's now becoming, I suppose, recognised as, there's a lot of stuff that he did back in his time that have led us to this exact point in time, exactly what he spoke about, 50, 60 years ago. And, we are a very old family business, and integrity is everything, and when you look at what Porcelanosa did and the effort they made, that just made sense. That's who we are. And we moved to these sorts of companies, and we did all these certifications and built and moved to the Green Building Council before anyone even knew it existed. And we started thinking in this space, because if you think short term, you will get short-term results. And if you think long-term, you're most likely going to give yourself every opportunity to be in existence. So why do we go down this road? I actually passionately believe that if we continue to use and burn earth like a toy, it's just going to be a disaster. Driving from home to work, and you see the council clean-outs, and you see all the disposable stuff on the footpath, you look at it and go, what are we doing? What are we doing? This is nuts. So we live and breathe it. We don't force it down anyone's throat. We believe in it. If people want the information, it's there and it's available. And for those people who are concerned about what's going to happen in the future, we're seeing governments act and move in ways that they have never had to in the past. And they're going to have to do it on a level and a playing field that is so much different to what has happened in the past. It is just going to change at such a rate of knots. We are not going to understand what's going to be forced upon us. We're going to have to learn all these terms. We're going to have to start understanding what GHGs and UNFCCs and all the acronyms you want. It's like an acronym bingo going. But we are going to be forced down this road to change.
And it's going to need really strong leadership in this country.
Absolutely.
Massive leadership. And there's going to be resistance to the cows come in for it. It's going to take a very, very strong leader to pull this forward.
Let's not look at this as a threat. This is the biggest opportunity in front of us.
It is.
The world's problem today is actually carbon. Carbon's not a bad thing. Pollution is the opportunity we have today to harvest and actually put where it should be in the ground. That's what carbon's good. Where it is the wrong space. Pollution is our opportunity. How do we get this pollution and put it in the right spot? That's our challenge. And that's a good challenge. We're actually talking about reharvesting earth. We're talking about putting back the trees and the spaces and the thinking within our home environments. And rather than just, filling everything up with water and, leaving it, it's actually about harvesting the water in our homes again. I remember a friend of mine put a water tank on his house in Newcastle about 25 years ago, and council actually forced him to remove it because it was considered an environmental dangerous thing. It'll breed mosquitoes and snakes might get, who knows. But they actually made him remove it. And then 10 years later, are asking him to put one back on. It's like, what the hell's leadership? Yeah. It has to be driven from the top. Yeah. And it has to be for the right reason. This political play that goes on and the misinformation, the only way we will make informed decisions are by having proper companies audited by third parties to the world's best standards, and we can share that information to make people make the right decision. That's all they want, Francis. They want to be able to make the decision that, without going down on these rabbit holes and understanding it all, that is the right decision. And therefore the governments need to make those people who are doing these processes and change and investments, they need to bring them forward. They need to encourage them. If they don't drive these companies, they're not going to get a return on what they're doing.
So I think one of the things that listeners will be thinking about now is, that's fine, you buy the quality, it's going to last. But I think some of them will be asking, but what about if I can't afford all the different products that have to go into my renovation or new build? I want the ones that are going to last. I want the ones that are sustainable. I want the ones that are really good quality. I'm not going to argue with that point, but I can't afford them all. What do you say to them?
we minimise the use of materials. I mean, materials minimalisation is part of all the programs. So rather than looking at the house and saying, oh, I need this and this and this and this and this, and I need a bigger house, I need a bigger footprint, I need this.
Yeah, that.
Let's look at it objectively and say what you want and what you need to align to your expense. If you're going to spend this much money and your dream is for the 1,000 square foot home, or maybe you got to bring it back to 900 or 800 or 700, whatever it is. And maybe we don't need to fill it with everything. Maybe we need to say, well, you know what? We'll just have a brick wall for a while. And when we find something or some money, maybe we can do something with that brick wall. We need to cut our consumption is where it's heading to fit the budgets that we've got.
Yeah, I think that is really, really wise words. And it is this, we're a very impatient society. So I talk about, on previous episodes, I've talked about the European mentality, what I experienced as the European mentality. And that was you wait, you save, and you buy quality because it's going to last. Rather than having this fast fashion mentality, fast fashion interiors mentality of, but I want it now. I want my house to have all the latest things, and I have to have this and I have to have that. And it's not a need, it's a want, but it's going to go out on the nature strip in 12 months because you're going to get sick of it because you're not really that attached to it. And so I just find in Europe, the mentality is totally different around just from a consumer level. I'm going to wait. My house might be a bit empty, and I live like this in Amsterdam myself. I'm just going to wait and get the stuff that I know is really good quality, and 30 years later, it's still in my house today. It's traveled around the world with me, and it's still in my house today because it's good, and I saved really hard for it, and it's going to stand the test of time. They have a different mentality than here. And I'm so glad you said what you said as well. It doesn't have to be so big. Someone came to me the other day with a house that they were going to knock over a really good house, and it's got 7 bathrooms with 2 children. And oh yeah, but maybe we'll have someone that stays, and it's just like 7 bathrooms. I just couldn't even get my head around it, and it was just a normal suburban block, and I just can't get my head around it. But
we talked about materialities. I mean, you go from a particular material in a room to another room, you go to a different material. Well, I mean, we're talking about timber. I mean, people say, oh, I can't afford everything. Well, let's look at moving away from marble to a product that is green certified, that is half the price of marble, that doesn't require sealing, and it's half the cost to install.
And he's more durable, and it's going to last. Yeah, he's more durable, and you won't have all the headaches with it.
You go to timber. I mean, people want to have these beautiful timber planks through their house. I mean, the reality is, by the time we get to the timbers that we should be using, that are forest stewardship, and they're from the right place, and they're properly harvested, material replacements are already, there's a circular economy to it. And by the time we install those things, we start talking about hundreds of dollars a metre. Maybe we're going to go back to a timber tile that actually looks brilliant. It's made by the most abundant raw material on Earth itself. We're now going to platinum graded materials that, the dogs and the kids and everything can live on it without any sealers and micro nanotechnologies that need to be replaced every 4 or 5 years. And we've just spent half as much money.
Yeah. And plus all the varnishes and the stains and the treatment of those products as well. So there's a lot of things to think about. And I think it comes back to that whole thing about the circle. It's that you've got to think about just not this short term, it's that full circle or cycle to consider all the elements, not just the one component.
It's really interesting. We can sit on a podcast today and we can communicate, linear thinking and circular economy. I mean, what are they? I mean, linear thinking is, over there, we'll get to it. And circular is, we've already thought about it before we have, and end game's already considered. So that's where the next 4 years of people's life is going to start being educated and moving towards. We're going to start understanding what this circular economy actually means.
Yeah.
And that education platform is going to take a long time to wind into our day-to-day thinking and decision making. And that's great. It's awesome. It's such an opportunity.
It is an opportunity. But the Europeans found it was an opportunity 50 years ago or earlier? What about King Charles? He had all these, everyone thought he was an absolute nutcase, and he was such a forward thinker in terms of, creating his duchy organics and everything else. And now what he was saying 50 years ago has come to the fore. And now everyone thought he was nuts.
Yeah.
Anyway, so what's one piece of advice that you'd like to leave our listeners with regarding choosing sustainable products for their home? I think you've touched on this a lot, but if you could just give them one thing to take away from today when they're choosing all the things for their home, what would that one thing be?
Yeah, product minimalisation and, life cycle assessment. It's got to be life cycle assessment. For me, I built a home and I didn't want any paint on the outside of the house. I wanted it to be low maintenance, don't have to touch it. I looked at the longest serving materials I can put into that home that don't have to be touched in my existence. I put it in once, that's it. Every decision I took was about the highest life cycle assessment, longest lasting materials I could possibly buy. I want my fridge to be there in 30 years time. I want it to be able to hand my fridge down to my kids. That's the thinking I took.
Yeah.
And, it's like, oh yeah, but you can get this one for half the price. And it's like, yeah, I know I can. And
you're going to replace it.
I got no furniture in my house, and I got some, some hand-me-down furniture, and that's sweet. I don't mind. But everything I got in that home, I know is going to last the test of time. And life cycle assessment.
I think that's an awesome tip. It's been awesome having you on the show, Rich, and it's been so good to chat to you again. It's sort of, we didn't get too political, which is good because it's such a political topic anyway. But you've shared so much awesome information. I always love listening to you because your passion and your knowledge is just so incredible. So I really appreciate you giving your time today.
You're a legend, Francis. I love being with you, and I can't wait to catch up again. What you do is awesome. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Richard. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of My Forever Home. If you're ready to renovate or build a new home and you need help to create a beautiful and functional forever home, you can book a chat with me directly at whitepebbleinteriors.com.au/chat. Have a great day.